this episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Okay, as per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show and commented. It's, as I say, always appreciated, and it's always nice to see new people, new viewers commenting on the show, which is really nice. And certainly it's always sort of gratifying when somebody says, "Oh, I tasted this particular bottling on your recommendation and thought it was really good." So it kind of makes me feel like at least I'm doing something right, I suppose. I mean, I know that we all have different tastes when it comes to whiskey, but like I've always said, hopefully that the reviews that I give are honest, and if I choose to sell a bottle, you pretty much know that the quality is going to be pretty good. I mean, yeah, obviously, some people love the peated whiskies, for example, and some people don't. It's just all a matter of taste at the end of the day. But certainly, I think that quality will always shine through. Anyway, before we start this week's episode of the show, quick update on things. The shop is technically closed to the public, although we are doing click and collect a mail order, and if you phone through an order, you can come and pick that up. So we're not kind of letting people kind of walk in off the streets. Not that there's very many people on the streets at the moment, it has to be said. We're also going to start the new year of tasting evenings with a Burns night evening on the 27th of January. So tickets are available on the website. I think £35. Usual format, hopefully about half dozen interesting whiskies, and depending upon obviously the ticket sales will depend upon what budget I've got to play with. So I hope you'll join myself and Ian, and I hope there'll be the usual crew, shall we say, with hopefully some new faces. If you've never sort of joined us before for one of the evenings, obviously, even if you don't live in Nottingham, we can obviously post the samples out to you. There is a small postage charge, but if you fancy joining us for an interesting evening, then yeah, please purchase a ticket. So. Right, okay, so that's a hard sell over and done with. This week's episode of the show, I thought I fancy doing something a little bit different, and to be honest with you, it's kind of I built it around Stauning, because I received some samples prior to Christmas, and I thought it would be interesting to sort of to do a European episode of the show, because in Europe there are some interesting distilleries, as we well know, although the amount of times I've heard, when customers have come into the shop to, certainly over the Christmas period, to buy presents and try, I would often ask the question, something non-Scottish, madam or sir, and they'll go, "Oh no, can't do that, he only likes Scotch whiskies," and there's still this kind of mental block with a lot of people that only Scotland produces good whiskey, and we all know that is not true. Great whiskey can come from anywhere, and there are some not so great whiskies produced in Scotland, as we well know, but we're not dwelling on that. The issue I've often had with European whiskies is when I first started encountering them about mid-2000s, I guess, a lot of the spirit was very young. The distilleries had only really sort of got into production. The spirit had got to about 3 years of age, and it was onto the market, and obviously there was a pressure from a financial point of view to do that. I mean, a lot of these distilleries didn't have the luxury of sitting on their spirit for 10 years or whatever, and hence a lot of them were just a little too young, a little fainty, a little sometimes rough around the edges, and really just an interesting look into the distillery, but just really nowhere near ready for bottling. And as years have gone by, the distilleries have seemed to, a lot of them have taken a very similar kind of stance to the Penderyn distillery in Wales, in that they said, well, our customers like our spirit young, so therefore we're going to carry on bottling it at a young age, even though we have now got stocks of, you know, well matured spirit. You know, our core range, for want of a better word, is still going to be pretty much the same as it always has been. And in some respects, I can understand that. You know, distilleries obviously have fans, and you know, if you start playing around with your spirit, you know, you may well lose them. But equally, you know, you may well gain more fans if you just give your spirit a little bit more time in the cask. So that was always the biggest issue I had with a lot of the European distilleries. So anyway, so let's talk about the distilleries we're looking at today. As I've mentioned, obviously this is built around the Stauning samples, and obviously 3 samples is not enough to do an episode of the show, so I had a rummage in the World Whisky Awards sampled box from last year, and obviously picked out 3 other ones to join it. So we're looking at 2 Belgian distilleries, along with obviously Stauning, which is a Danish distillery. So we're looking at the Het Anker distillery, or brewery as the case may be. Now that was founded in 1471, and I believe was as a brewery obviously, and I believe they might have dabbled in Geneva production. Certainly it wasn't until 2003 that Charles Leclerc started experimenting with distilling malt whiskey, I believe using or had help, shall we say, from probably another distiller, I believe, and was playing around with using his Gould and Carolus, which is the name of the whiskey, beer as the base to you know, as to ferment and then distill from. Interesting concept, you know, and so the first release of his Gould and Carolus single malt was in 2008. In 2010 they moved to a purpose-built distillery, and they had stills built at 4 sites in Scotland, like a lot of distilleries. So they have a 3,000 litre wash and a 2,000 litre spirit still. So their standard bottling, or their only bottling as far as I'm aware, the Gould and Carolus, is made from the beer base, although they don't use the hops or the spices, and it's given a sort of 4 to 5 days fermentation, which I'm pretty much guessing is a lot longer than you would for a normal beer. So you're looking at sort of what, 96 to 110 hours. So obviously going for the nice fruity estery base wash, and you know, we shall see whether that comes through. The second of the 2 Belgian distilleries is called the Owl Distillery. This was started production in 2004, and like a lot of distilleries, sold off the initial casks sort of like almost en primeur, I suppose. So you know, you kind of like bought your bottles 3 years before it was ready. So they obviously had that pressure of 3 years, ding, get the stuff bottled, get it out, you know, and consequently their range, again, even though we're now sort of 16 years or 17 years on from their first distillation, it certainly seems that they've again stuck to the same formula, 3 to 4 year old spirit, and again, you know, so we shall see what they're like. Interestingly enough, the stills that they currently use came from Cappadonic. So, well, Cappadonic, as you know, a bit hit and miss, but we shall see what the Owl gives us. And obviously, we're looking at Stauning. As I said, this was part of the reason for the tasting. So Stauning was founded in 2006 using small pilot stills that were made in Spain, and subsequently they replaced them with you know, the more sort of interesting kind of like shaped stills. They're not quite sort of pot stills. They were almost sort of like an eau de vie kind of still in 2012, and they now have two spirit and two wash stills. The barley is sourced from in Denmark. It's floor malted along with their rye as well, and they produce a peated malt which uses Danish peat. So this is, you know, a real representation of, you know, of the spirit of Denmark. So I first encountered it in 2014, so hadn't been going for an awful long time. I only tasted, or I'd only had the opportunity to taste their peated spirit, and it fell into the same kind of trap as a lot of the other distilleries did. Far too young, not enough character, really fainty, and just to me wasn't of a great deal of interest. So when the current distributors sort of like got in touch and said, you want some samples, I thought, well, yeah, okay, let's have a look at it. Because I mean, I think last year, I believe Diageo poured a huge amount of money into the distillery. They've kind of revamped the range, gone on to sort of 70 CL bottles. They've kind of added, I think, no, the Kaos, I think was already in production in 2014. But obviously this is all to do with the relaunch, the rebranding, yada yada yada, all those horrible marketing words. But just curious to see where we're at with regards to what the spirit is like. So I think I've talked enough, and my throat is getting a little bit dry. So I think it's time to taste some whiskey, I think. And no, actually, no, got to introduce the lineup first, haven't I? Hang fire. Right, okay, so we're going to kick off with the two Belgian Owl bottlings. This one is called Identite. It's aged in first fill bourbon, and the spirit itself is 36 months old. So, like I said, they've kept to the same kind of standard. I don't think this bottling is still available, although it seems to have dropped the term identity. Certainly it's available in the UK just as Belgian Owl, but I'm guessing it's just different names for different markets. The second bottling is an interesting one. It's called the By Jove collection, the Yellow M. Bottle of 46%. This is edition number 4. I don't know how many editions they're at the moment. I mean, considering this was 4 years old, and I tasted it back in December of 2018 for the 2019 World Whisky Awards. They may well be on to about batch 5 or 6 now. I had absolutely no idea. Then we're going to look at the Het Anker bottling, the Gould and Carolus single malt. Like I said, distilled from the beer base. It is aged in a combination of first fill bourbon, or initially in first fill bourbon, I think for about I think it's 3 years, I think, and then given, I think, 6 months finishing in what they call Het Anker casks, which to you and me are scraped and recharred ex-wine casks. So, like, again, you know, it may be sort of some of the they were obviously a forerunner of the use of these casks, I would imagine. I mean, certainly a number of other younger distilleries, like Cotswolds, for example, and White Peaks, I think, are playing around with STR casks. Now seems to be a bit of a fetish for the use of those. Anyway, that's nice. You know, a nice colour to it. So, which, talking of nice colour, we'll move on to the 3 Stauning. This is the floor malted rye, bottle of 48%. Now, interestingly enough, not 100% rye. It is only 51% malted rye with 48% or 49%, I should say, malted barley. So could be interesting. Like I said, I'm guessing still fairly young, but we should obviously see what that's like. And then the next bottle is the triple malt Kaos. Like I said, this was introduced in 2014, bottle of 46%. and it's a blend of their single malt, their malted rye, and their peated barley. So chucked together. Well, not all chucked together. It's obviously aged in American oak and obviously sort of blended well together rather than chucked all together. Being anyway. And the last bottle we're looking at is their peat, which is made from 100% floor malted peated barley. So bottle at 47%. So like I said, I'm getting a little bit dry in the throat. So now I'm going to taste some whiskey. Right, okay, so let's kick off with the Belgian Owl Identity, so 36 months old. Pleasant, quite estery. Now, so it says to me that the fermentation time is pretty long, and I believe that it's, again, 60 to 110 hours, so they're aiming for quite a sort of Mac-Myra-esque kind of estery fruitiness, so we've got unsweetened pineapple, barley, a little bit of banana, pear, tangerine. It's got a pleasant, musky, slightly floral note. And again, a little bit of oak, not a huge amount. I mean, you wouldn't have expected a huge amount of oak for just this short length of time. But it's there, it's noticeable. Obviously why they're using first fill oak to get at least, if this was refill oak, I would imagine you would, well, I'm pretty certain you'd need to leave it a little while longer to get the oak character. So, it's an appealing nose, it's pleasant, I really quite like it, and like I said, it's got a very Mac-Myra-esque demeanour to it, which I think is certainly it's certainly praise. Anyway, let's see what the pan looks like. Pleasant, fruity. It's a bit short, it has to be said. Does tail off fairly quickly, a little bit of spice on the finish, but again, pleasantly estery, got a lovely sweetness to it. It's like sugar coating to the barley, white fruit, apricot, tangerine, pineapple, banana. Not hugely complex, but it's a lovely mouthful. And you can see that this is what they've decided to do. They thought, right, okay, we're going to bottle at a young age. We've got to produce a fruity whiskey that will be bottleable at a young age, and it just ticks all the right boxes for that kind of style. Like I said, it's not the most complex whiskey on the planet, but it's pleasant. It's a lovely mouthful. It's sort of whiskey that I really enjoy because it's got lots of fruit. We're not talking edgy sort of rough bits. We're not talking sort of anything like that. It is just a lovely whiskey. Okay, so let's move on to the by Jove collection. Don't quite know what the yellow M refers to. It's probably not quite Brookladdy's yellow submarine business, is it? But anyway, let's see what the nose gives us then, shall we? Now you can smell it's got a little bit more maturity, but I mean it has. You can smell it. That extra year is giving it a little bit more. Seems to have brought out a little bit more oak, a little bit more oiliness. It's still fruity. You can still get the sort of the white fruits and apricot. It's maybe not quite so sort of bubble gummy. There's a little bit more barley character. It just feels a little bit more grown up. I would love to see this at 8 to 10. I think sort of by then, I think the fruit will probably have lost a little bit more of that sort of youthful bubblegummy sweety kind of character, and you'll have a little bit more oak, a little bit more barley character. But again, it's a lovely nose. Let's see what that's like. like the nose. A little bit more barley character, a little less of the sweet fruit, but still pleasantly fruity. Juicy apricots, pear, peach, touch of pineapple, a little bit more oak, which is starting to bitter just a little bit on the finish, but you know, I like that. It's kind of adding a counterbalancing note. Yeah, I think sort of, I mean, there's more oak character, obviously. I think if they're going to, I suppose there's always a bit of a danger here now that having tasted that year jump, the oak was really quite noticeable. I think if they were going to sort of release this as an 8 to 10 year old, they would have at least wanted to have matured some spirit in refill casks to back in with that, because it does feel like the oak is getting sort of more noticeable just after 12 months. So I think if they were going to do that, then I personally would, like I say, vat in some not quite so heavily oaked spirit, and you know, see what it's like, because I think that could be really, really intriguing. And yeah, I like that. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Gould and Carolus single malt. Now, I think I'm right in saying that this was the best Belgian whiskey in the last year's World Whisky Awards, so see what those gives us. Now, definitely different to the Belgian Owl, not as fruity, not as estery. There's a little bit more oiliness to it. There's some green banana-y kind of notes. There's some herbal, almost herbally rye kind of notes. And although there is an inherent fruitiness there, it's not the sort of like bubblegummy, youthful kind of estery fruitiness. Although, yeah, there's a little bit more spirit character, but it's not off the still. It's not sort of fainty. It's young, but it's not too young. There's a touch of buttery oak. I'm not getting a great deal of sort of bitter tannins or recharred kind of tannins or charred oak. It's quite soft. So obviously the sort of the finishing in the STR casks has been not too long. It's just added, you know, probably more. It's given more structure. It feels like than an actual kind of character of itself, if you see what I mean. Anyway, let's see what that's like. The palate's a little rawer, more cereally, shorter, touch of spice, a little bit of fruit, a little bit of barley, quite malty. There is that slight herbally, it's not kind of hoppy, sort of, yeah, IPA-y kind of finish to it, which is interesting. It's a little bit simpler on the palate than the nose would kind of imply, but again, it's interesting. It's not fainty, it's not raw, although it has more young cereal kind of character. And yeah, maybe it could have done with a little bit more complexity on the palate, but you know, I think as whiskey goes, I think that's really good. Right, okay, so let's move on to the first of the Staunings. This is the floor malted rye. Let's see what the nose gives us. Pungent, youthful rye. Now, slightly herbal. I think that if this was 100% rye or 90-odd% rye, this would have just been like I remember Stauning to be, slightly fainty, raw. It feels to me that the malted barley is kind of filling in the gaps to a certain extent. There's pepper, menthol, a little bit of barley, touch of vanilla oak. It's got a roasted malt kind of character to it, and that lovely sort of slightly dark rye, more herbal than spicy. I'm getting sort of almost kind of rosemary. But like I said, I think if this was 100% rye, it would have been really quite lean, and it feels like to me that the malted barley component is kind of giving it a bit more weight. So in that respect, kind of works. Let's see what it like. Again, the palate is it's very much like the nose. It's the barley, the malted barley is forming a kind of bedrock. You get that kind of weight, and it allows the sort of like the youthful rye to sort of come through with that intense pepper and herbal rye, dark rye bread, forest fruit, touch of chocolate, little bit of oak, which kind of like again is sort of working well in combination with the barley to give it an underpinning. And I think, like I say, that if there was the barley component wasn't there, this would be really quite one-dimensional and quite raw and well, not quite cereally, but it would have been lean, shall we say, because that rye just doesn't kind of quite have enough weight at the age of which it's bottled. And I'm guessing, like I said, it's not particularly old spirit. If this is about sort of 3, maybe 4 at the very most. But like I said, I think that they've blended it together well, or should we say the mash bill has been used particularly well, and they've kind of worked it out, and it works. And I think that's a huge improvement on where it was a few years ago. Okay, so let's move on to the Kaos. Let's see what this gives us then, shall we? That's a nice nose. It's an interesting nose. It kind of opens up with the sort of phenolic herbal peat, youthful chunky yeah. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Kaos. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Well, that's an interesting nose. It kind of opens up with that sort of quite phenolic peat character. Chunky barley, a bit of rye, touch of apple. Again, it's got that foresty fruit kind of character. Touch of oil, a little bit of smokiness. Again, there's a little rawness there, but you know what? It kind of works. Touch of almost cold tea, and cocoa powder possibly. I mean, it's not the sort of nose that everybody is going to enjoy, but I think it's really quite intriguing. It's different. It's got something different happening, and yeah, like I said, I mean, when you're trying to sell a non-Scottish whiskey, you know, you sort of you often get the what's so different about it, and, you know, and this is just, you know, you say, well, this has got a real difference to it, and I think it's really intriguing. I really like this. So the pass on. Opens up that oily rye, not quite as full, it's a little leaner on the palate, a little bit of oak kind of comes through, a little bit of malt on the mid palate. Peat really starts coming in towards the end. It's got that sort of oily phenolic herbal kind of character. It's got a lovely intensity, and yeah, I like that. I think it's got a great progression. And yes, you can get all the components. You certainly get the rye, you get the malt, you get the peat, you get the oak. What do you want? I mean, that's really very, very good. Okay, so let's move on to the peat. Let's see what those gives us on this end, shall we? Oily, soapy, young, slightly fainty. This is just kind of, again, just reminds me of what European whiskies used to be like. It's lean. It's got some nice oily peat. It's got some pleasant phenolic character. There's a little bit of damp ash and earth, but it's just too young. It's too. I mean, I know that sort of, you know, if you want intensity of peat, you have to bottle kind of young. But you know, there is no sort of getting away from the fact that this is just too young. I mean, it has some charm, I guess, but the trouble is that sort of slight faintiness is always there, you know, and it's just kind of like, it's like nails on the chalkboard kind of thing. Anyway, let's see what that's like. Again, it's lean, it's slightly fainty, it's young, it's got some nice peat character, but it's short, it's really immature, it's just sort of like stops rather abruptly, and it just feels a little bit disjointed. It rather, you know, it's not quite married together. I'm not really getting any oak character. It's all a bit, you know, and like I said, this is just reminiscent of how European whiskies used to be, and yeah, I'm not kind of quite sort of really loving that particular. Okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show up. So I think interesting tasting. I really like what the Belgian Owl or the Owl Distillery, I should say, is doing. It's certainly, you know, tailored its production to an early release, so long fermentation, nice estuary spirit. Yeah, it kind of works really quite nicely. I like the identity of the 36-month-old release. Yeah, I mean, not hugely complex, but you know, a pleasant mouthful. The by Jove collection, yeah, I mean, it was intriguing to see. You know, you could taste that the change in the spirit that just 12 months had given it. And like I said, I think if they're going to release, you know, an older expression, then vatting in some refill American oak matured spirit, I think is the way to go for that, and I'd be intrigued to see it. It has to be said. The Gould and Carolus, yeah, again interesting. It's quite different to the Belgian Owl, and whether it's I forget which way round what scores I gave to these three in particular. I think it'd be very difficult to sort of like, you know, pick one over the other because they are quite different. But the character is really intriguing and different, which is, you know, what you want from you know, a European distillery. The Stauning Malted Rye, yeah, really like that. Like I said, I think the use of the malted or the barley component within the mash bill has certainly worked exactly as they probably wanted it to do, and you know, like I said, filled in the gaps around the rye. The Kaos, well, just really intriguing. Definitely different, and like again, like I said, you know, if you want something different, you know, you want a European distillery to give you something kind of unique, kind of, and something that's just not Scottish, then brilliant. That really fits the bill. And obviously, I purchased both of those bottlings, and they're available on the website. And and finally the Stormy Peak, which I didn't purchase. Obviously, I didn't really warm to it. It seemed to sort of like just remind me of how European whiskies were when I first encountered them. Too young, too lean, too fainty. Yeah, okay, it's got some peat intensity, but you know, there is a sort of a kind of a balance to be made between keeping intensity and making sure your spirit is fully mature, or at least mature enough, shall we say. And I don't think that was. So for me, that one didn't kind of work as well as the others. So so there you go. That's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I hope you've enjoyed it. I think it's been really intriguing, really different. Like I said, I hope a number of you will purchase tickets to the next virtual whiskey tasting. I know it's online. I know it's not entirely the same as doing it face to face, but you know, until God knows when, you know, it's the new norm, as they say. But everybody seems to have a really good time on them, and so, you know, please purchase a ticket and join me, you know. And well, anyway, until next time, it's a good afternoon and good ramming.